I don't really like the word trauma, because when that word is shared, it often rings as a resonance of there's something wrong with me, I'm damaged, or there's somehow trauma. You know, in our culture, it's usually associated with bad events, bad things happening. Think of trauma as energy in your body that's stored, that has information for you, and it wants to be reintegrated, but it doesn't yet know how. So it's an isolated, separate part of your being that is stored energy with information. Now that's a lot longer than to say trauma, but it feels energetically more accurate. Is this making sense, what I'm talking about? So when I say trauma, it's usually one of two different ways that we've been met in life without attunement. So attunement is when you have an interaction with somebody and they're feeling you. When somebody doesn't have attunement, they are likely to violate your boundaries or neglect you. It's one of those two things. So often as we're growing up, especially in the first 7 years of life, we're very vulnerable to a lack of attunement because we're dependent and we don't have an ego to separate what's happening to us from another person. In other words, in the first 7 years of life, all the things that happen to us, we will conclude that it's our fault because we don't have an ego to separate self from another. So if you look at a child and you talk to a child, it's all about them. Basically, their life is their universe. They don't have an ability to say, I think that's mummy's responsibility. No, if something feels off, they feel it as it's their fault because the only thing that exists is their world. They will take everything personally. So in the first 7 years, there's a lot of imprints that come into young nervous systems. And if we aren't attuned as parents or in an environment where children are being raised, they are open to receiving potential violations and neglect. And I think we've all had this to some degree in our life, to different degrees. Some with what would be called a capital T trauma, really serious violation, sexual abuse, different types of, intense stuff that we read about that is just like makes us sick to the core. Some of us have had that, but nearly all of us have had trauma with a small t. This is the micro violations, the continual subtle neglect that comes through a lack of attunement over many, many years. This will be experienced for many of us as an experience of being a bit numb, feeling a bit unfelt, ungot, unseen in our childhood years. Having parents that may have provided for us on a structural level, roof over the head, food in the belly, but wasn't emotionally available. We weren't securely attached. Maybe parents split up at an early age, and therefore we were not felt. Now, the problem with neglect is that most of us will never know we were neglected because there's no such thing as feeling neglect. Neglect is an absence of attunement, and whenever you experience an absence of something, we don't know that we never had it if we never had it, because we don't know what we've missed if it's never been received. So one of the ways you can detect neglect in your life is whether you've become hyper-independent. That's the compensation. So people who are deeply neglected become very functional in their life, and they become very strong on their own 2 feet, and they go beyond just natural, healthy independence. They become really independent. They're like, no, independence has become my identity. I need to know that I can do it on my own, because they won't trust or rely on anybody else, because that's what neglect does. Has anyone experienced, or is anyone connecting to this, what I'm sharing right now?
Yes.
I'm just describing a little bit of my own story. Right? And violations, like I said, could be something really, really severe, but it can also be, for example, a mother or a father who just very subtly steps over sovereignty, steps over boundaries, and doesn't quite honor a no, overrides choice, creativity, squashes. And every time that happens, there's just a contraction that develops in that child's nervous system. They get just a little bit smaller, and they get less of a voice to claim who they are. So a baby coming out, into the world is open, big, huge force of life, free. And then over the years, that life force gets a bit contorted and bent out of shape as it tries to fit with the world and with parental ideals and conditioning of the environment and school and religion. And eventually we grow up as adults and we wake up and we're literally a contorted shape. We don't recognize it. Physically we may be still upright, but energetically we're a little bit off. We're not as free, we're not open, we're not connected to the light, to the dark, to the left, to the right, to the here and the there. We're just simply a dimmer version of ourselves. And so my purpose, and these retreats exist to liberate the contortion and to return to essence, to free that bound life force that is being trapped through intimacy stories and violations and neglect and boundaries and all that stuff that has created all of this, and to finally come home. The good news is that you don't need to figure out who did what to you, how and when to heal all of this. So it's not a model so much around therapy of psychoanalyzing your history, but we do it through training you to become very subtly aware of how you're closing your heart, and to give you the tools to open your heart. And when you open your heart, you will begin to notice more receptivity to feeling. And as you begin to open to self, to other, to life, you will begin to meet your desire, you'll be able to meet your life force, your contractions, and you'll be able to expand into new emotional, energetic ranges. And as you do that, you unkink yourself without necessarily having to dwell on all your stories. What I found over the years is that there is a slight preoccupation in the personal development space where there's a lot of emphasis on trying to understand what happened to us, and that it becomes all a bit heady, and that we need to figure our shit out, know our stuff. And although there's a part of that that's true, we can get a little bit lost in the whole wordy analysis paralysis of our lives lived. Is this making sense? Yeah. It will make embodied and experiential sense over the days. A classic example to kind of give this more shape and texture is I used to be a practicing chiropractor. Everyone familiar what a chiropractor is? Bone cracker, some people would call it. I love the sound when I hear bones just crumbling behind my hands. That was my two priorities in my life: martial arts and chiropractic. Wound them and heal them. Take them out, leave the card. Perfect business model. But the chiropractic that I used to do, that I was trained in, is there would be a patient coming in with pain normally, low back pain, headaches. They usually come with some kind of problem, somehow a discomfort, and they're crying out for relief. They're like, doc, touch me, do something, crack me so I can feel better again. This is the classic model of chiropractic. Pain creates motivation to get something fixed. They go to a chiropractor. Chiropractor looks at the spine, and this art of feeling for tension and pain is called palpation, this ability to put hands on the body and start to gently move the body. And what the chiropractor is doing is, through moving the spine and sensing and attuning through their fingers, they're looking for changes in heat, swelling, restriction of movement, tension, right? They're looking for the pain point, the problem. And it's usually red, swollen, hot, hurting, and it doesn't move. And they call this area of contraction in the body or in the spine a subluxation. So in traditional chiropractic, what we're trained to do is find these subluxations and then inject energy into them to release the bound energy that is inside. So we're literally taught to go, okay, is that where you're restricted and that's where you're hurting? Boom. Let's put our attention and energy into the spine right here. Now what happens when that occurs is relief. There is in fact a big pop and there's more movement, less swelling, there is relief temporarily, and the person gets off the bench and goes, holy shit, you did it. So they're very happy to give the money in that moment, right? But something happens, curiously, after a few days. They haven't been re-educated. Their body doesn't know anything different. They go to lift that brick or do that movement or exercise in that specific way, and then boom, it kicks off again. And they return. Whew. Ouch. Return. Fix. Ouch. Return. And it creates a dependency on the doctor. The more they become injured and they don't actually get re-educated, or their nervous system doesn't know how to adjust, they will begin to simply get dependent on the relief of somebody else fixing them. This creates disempowerment and dependency. This is why I left the chiropractic profession very early on. It was like something felt intrinsically out of integrity to be a source of relief that felt a little bit like a drug. They needed us too much when they were hurting. And the focus was on taking away the pain, but not on re-establishing strength and bringing that body into harmony and health, right? So then what I studied was a different type of chiropractic. It was called network care. Have anyone heard of network care? So network chiropractic is a fascinating model, which basically patient comes in and instead of finding subluxations, the chiropractor learns to become attuned to what they call gateways. And gateways are the opposite. It's not where is the spine locked in contraction. It's where is this body receptive? Where is the spine feeling safe? Where is the body relaxed and free of tension and is open to input? And it identifies parts of the body where energetically you are absolutely alive and completely open for new information. And instead of adjusting into the pain, they adjust directly into the gateway using the slightest, most subtlest, most almost imperceptible touch. So no bone cracking, but a slight remembrance. And energetically teaching the body how to access safety and resource and relaxation. And you should see what happens to these people on the bench when they get adjusted in this way. It's like the nervous system remembers and it starts to reorganize and release the subluxations from the inside out, and they literally begin to move on the table and they adjust themselves. No needed, they themselves through getting new information through these gateways. Now the reason I'm sharing all of this for you, because I'm literally sharing how our time in circle and how the healing process works, is that this isn't so much about you bringing problems and then us focusing on your pain points, but it's in fact finding the gateways, the emotional energetic spaces where you're already open and working with your open parts as a doorway into liberating more areas of your life. Rather than trying to bang down the doors of where you're defended and closed and you don't want to go there, it's like through the availability of where you're already a yes, we enter. That's the doorway that we go through. Is this making at least theoretical sense? Cool. Cool. And the analogy basically is that a lot of personal development and personal transformation is still using that old paradigm of find the pain, meet the pain. Versus, cool, we know you're hurting there. Where are you open? Where are you available? Let's go there. And then allow that new